Stop trusting your dopamine. Unlock the neuroscience to actually get stuff done. Why? You can't trust your dopamine. You know that moment where you sit down to do something important, maybe study for an exam, start writing that proposal, or finally fold your laundry, and suddenly you just check your phone for a second? 10 minutes later, you're scrolling through videos, you don't even remember how you got there, and your motivation evaporates. That's dopamine doing its job a little too well in the wrong direction. See, dopamine isn't the feeling of happiness. It's the chemical that pushes you toward action, toward whatever your brain predicts will bring pleasure or relief. And here's the problem. Modern life constantly floods that system with quick, artificial hits. Every notification, every like, every snack, every little instant win triggers the same circuitry your ancestors used to firearm. Your brain learns fast which actions equal reward. But those little hits come so easily now that your dopamine system gets hijacked, rewarding distraction instead of discipline. That's why motivation hacks often fail. You can tell yourself to focus, to power through, to grind, but if your brain's reward wiring is aimed at the easy stuff, your focus naturally drifts back to those micro hits. Motivation doesn't live in your willpower. Motivation doesn't live in your willpower. It lies. You're not unmotivated. You're miswired. So what does dopamine really do? Most people think it's released when you achieve a goal. But actually, science shows it spikes mainly during anticipation, the chase, not the catch. That anticipation gives you energy, focus, momentum. It's what pulls you through effort. The reward at the end feels good, but the dopamine was driving you long before that moment, which means if your brain anticipates a reward from checking messages more than it does from making progress on a goal, it'll push you toward the messages every time. Your brain's acting perfectly logical, it just has the wrong prediction map. It's tuned to short-term payoffs, so long-term work feels dull by comparison. Here's the key insight: dopamine doesn't care whether you scroll or study, binge or build. It only cares about what's been paired with It only cares about what's been paired with re-riff. If you teach it that distraction equals pleasure, distraction will feel magnetic. But if you teach it that effort and progress equal pleasure, effort starts to feel surprisingly good. That's what this video is all about. How to retrain your brain so the stuff that matters lights up your reward system again. You're going to learn how dopamine actually functions inside your motivation loop, why big goals feel flat while small wins explode with energy, and how to rebuild your circuitry so work feels rewarding again. We'll use neuroscience insights and practical tools. Nothing abstract, no fluff. You'll see how to design your cue systems, how to anchor positive emotion into focus, and how to turn repetition into rewritten wiring. And the best part, you won't be forcing motivation anymore. You'll be creating it automatically through the same biological process that used to distract you. In other words, the same system that made you crave quick hits can make you crave progress. By the end, you'll be able to spot dopamine traps instantly, know how to reroute them toward long-term payoffs, and build habits that genuinely feel good to repeat. So instead of guilt-based productivity or endless self-control, you'll finally understand your brain's actual operating system and learn to work with it instead of fighting it. All right, that's the roadmap. First, we'll expose the dopamine trap itself, the tiny everyday actions that quietly drain your motivation currency. Then, step by step, we'll rebuild your brain's reward loops from scratch so that each challenge comes with its own built-in hit. Let's start by seeing exactly how that trap works. The dopamine trap. Let's talk about the invisible loop that quietly decides your daily energy level, the dopamine trap. This trap isn't some dramatic addiction scenario. It's made up of the small, perfectly normal behaviors that most people repeat dozens of times a day. Checking your phone between paragraphs. Opening another tab when a task gets difficult. Rewarding yourself with snacks or a little digital break after one email. All of those moments feel harmless because the brain learns to predict a fast shot of satisfaction from them. But here's the twist. Every time you give in, you're training your dopamine system to expect instant gratification instead of long-term effort. And that learning happens fast, literally within a few repetitions. The science behind this is sneaky but simple. The science behind this is sneaky but simple. The science behind this is sneaky but simple. So dopamine fires when we anticipate a reward, not necessarily when we get one. That means the moment you see a notification badge or a new message icon, your dopamine system lights up with energy and curiosity. You suddenly feel a pull to check it, not because it's truly important, but because your brain's already predicting pleasure. It's practicing the move before you even decide consciously. And once you follow that cue, check the phone, scroll the feed, open the app, the brain logs that pattern. Cue equals reward. Anticipation equals energy. You just reinforced the loop again. Here's what makes this loop so powerful in modern life: it's everywhere, all day. The average person checks their phone about 100 times a day, and nearly all of those checks deliver tiny hits of stimulation. You're not consciously addicted to social media or notifications. You're conditioned to chase microbursts of dopamine that come faster than anything your long-term goals can match. It's like trying to enjoy the taste of a slow-cooked meal when you're surrounded by candy machines. The candy always wins, at least in the short run. Neuroscience explains why these micro-hits feel more exciting than your larger goals. In the brain, dopamine neurons don't spike for achievement, they spike for prediction error. When the actual reward is slightly better or arrives sooner than expected, dopamine surges. When things go exactly as expected, or worse, slower than predicted, dopamine drops. That's why you can finish a big project, reach a milestone, or even hit a fitness goal and feel strangely flat afterward. Your brain predicted the reward, so by the time it arrives, there's no surprise left. The excitement curve already ended. But a new text? A comment? That's unpredictable, and unpredictability equals a dopamine jackpot. We can think of it like nutrition for your motivation. Those constant digital pings are the junk food. Quick, intense, easy energy that leaves you feeling mentally bloated. Your long-term goals, on the other hand, are the slow-burning complex carbs. They take longer to digest, but they support lasting satisfaction. When you constantly snack on dopamine junk food, your palate for real work disappears. You start craving the next tiny hit instead of the slow, meaningful kind of reward that comes zaglegit. This is why so many smart people feel unfocused without understanding why. They assume the problem is discipline or laziness. But biologically, it's about relative stimulation levels. The baseline expectation for reward keeps getting faster and shallower, so normal effort feels dull in comparison. What used to give you energy, like making progress on a project or completing a workout, starts to feel like work in the worst sense of the just athlete. Meanwhile, distractions feel electric. The trap flips your motivation hierarchy upside down. Here's where things get really interesting. The more those shallow hits accumulate, the less sensitive your dopamine system becomes. It's the same mechanism that underlies tolerance in addictions. When stimulation is frequent, the receptors downregulate. You end up needing more novelty, more scrolling, just one more moments to feel the same level of engagement. And because those hits are fast and easy, your effort threshold rises too. Hard tasks feel even harder because they're competing against a brain that's been conditioned to expect instant payoff. That's why even starting feels impossible. You're trying to use low dopamine effort to fight a high dopamine habit. So how do you notice it? God, you can tell you're stuck in a dopamine trap when sitting still feels uncomfortable, but switching apps feels like relief. When you plan something meaningful yet always delay it for a small pleasure that doesn't last. When you feel busy but not productive. What's happening is that your reward system is mistaking activity for progress. Your brain gets tiny satisfaction signals without actually finishing anything. It feels like momentum, but it's mostly struggle. Here's a story that captures this perfectly. A student I coached once told me she felt motivated but scattered. Every time she sat to study, she rewarded herself with a quick message check after each paragraph as a little mental treat. Over time, the cue reversed. Instead of study reward, her brain learned message dopamine. Studying became just the space between dopamine hits. Once she saw that connection, she started flipping it, no phone until finishing one full page, then later one full chapter. Within 2 weeks, her focus stretched naturally and her nervous energy dropped. It wasn't magic, it was rewiring through simple behavior change. That's the point most people miss. Dopamine habituation doesn't mean you're doomed to be distracted. It just means your circuits got really good at rewarding the easy path. The moment you recognize that pattern, you can start feeding your brain a new one. But first, you have to step back and see the mechanics of the loop: cue, craving, response, and reward. Every distraction uses that sequence. Every new habit will too. The game isn't about removing dopamine, it's about reclaiming it. And once you start watching yourself at that level, things click fast. You'll notice that urge to just check something hit right as a task gets difficult. That's the moment to pause, breathe, and ask, what reward is my brain expecting? Naming the pattern interrupts the automaticity. Instead of falling into the cue response loop, you're observing it from above. That single second of awareness changes everything because it lets your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center, see. Once you see how common and predictable this trap is, you can also see how powerful the opposite direction will be. If every small distraction can condition a craving, then every small progress marker can too. That's the doorway out, building a dopamine system that rewards effort instead of escape. When we move into the next section, we'll break down how dopamine actually operates at the neural level, the partnership between your prefrontal cortex, which plans goals, and your striatum, which automates behaviors. This combination decides whether you chase long-term growth or short-term comfort. Once you understand that bridge, you'll know exactly how to rebuild motivation from the inside out. How dopamine actually works. All right, now that you can spot the dopamine trap, let's zoom into what's really happening inside your head when that craving hits. Because once you understand how dopamine actually works, you stop seeing it as this evil distraction molecule and start seeing it as your built-in engine for motivation, one you can steer if you know the controls. Here's the thing, dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about pursuit. It's not the chemical of content. Biologically, it's what tells your body and brain, this is worth doing. Whether that thing is cooking dinner, writing an essay, or opening Instagram, doesn't matter. The system is neutral. It only cares about what you've trained it to anticipate. So picture two major brain areas involved in motivation. The prefrontal cortex, that patch right behind your forehead, handles planning, focus, and decision-making. Basically the CEO. Then there's the striatum, buried deeper in your brain, which handles patterns and habits, the operations department. Dopamine connects these two. Think of it like the messaging signal that says, hey, this behavior led to a reward, let's automate it. Over time, your striatum takes over tasks that used to require conscious effort. That's how habits form. Your brain wires shortcuts between cues and actions, guided by dopamine. Now here's what research from Neuroscience shows. Dopamine spikes strongest before you get the reward, not after. When you're chasing something exciting, checking if your post got a like, expecting a text, or seeing progress in a game, your dopamine system lights up. That surge gives you energy, focus, and drive. It's what pulls you through effort. But as soon as the reward hits, dopamine levels drop sharply. That's why anticipation feels electric and achievement feels calm, sometimes even anticlimactic. This has massive implications for motivation. It means your energy depends more on what your brain expects than on what's actually happening. If your daily life is full of uncertain little rewards like refreshing feeds or glancing at your inbox, you're feeding the part of your brain that craves novelty and prediction error. That's why a random notification can override your best-laid plans. Your prefrontal cortex wants to finish the report, but your striatum has learned that unpredictable rewards show up faster elsewhere. It's like having two project managers arguing in your head, one planning the 5-year strategy and the other chasing shiny objects every 5 minutes. Let's make it concrete. Imagine you reach for your phone when you're supposed to write an essay. Even before you tap, your dopamine neurons start firing. They anticipate a possible message, an update, some novelty. That anticipation releases dopamine into the striatum, creating that little jolt of, this might be good. When you actually open the message, even if it's boring, the spike drops. But because the surge felt nice, your brain logs the sequence. See phone, feel excitement. The next time boredom appears, the brain whispers, that's the loop training in real time. Now reverse the scenario. Suppose instead that you start a task like outlining your essay. At first, no dopamine rush. The reward prediction map says, this is effort, payoff far away. So your motivation feels flat. But here's the key. Dopamine can grow inside effort, as long as your brain learns to associate small progress markers with positive anticipation. Every time you sense advancement, finishing a paragraph, seeing your word count rise, dopamine fires a small pulse. That's how you transform the feeling of work from friction into flow. Think of dopamine as a spotlight directing attention. Wherever the spotlight shines, energy follows. Modern life constantly hijacks that spotlight toward quick, uncertain events, social feeds, breaking news, tiny pings. If you want sustained motivation, you have to redirect it deliberately towards signals of progress, not just novelty. Here's another insight that surprises people. Your dopamine system doesn't actually distinguish between good or bad outcomes. It learns whatever gets repeated with emotional charge. That's why cravings and habits form on both sides of your life. Procrastination and productivity run on the same fuel. The only difference is what the brain predicts will feel rewarding. So, if you constantly pair progress with relief or satisfaction, even tiny amounts, you start to crave the feeling of moving forward. This also explains why we overvalue quick wins. The brain is wired for efficiency, wants the shortest route to predict Chixpagrido. In evolutionary terms, that made sense. Getting food today was safer than planning for harvest months away. But in modern goals, that instinct backfires. Success in school, careers, fitness, those all require delayed gratification. Your dopamine system didn't evolve for that timeline, which is why we must train it deliberately. Now, here's where the relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the striatum becomes critical. The prefrontal cortex can override automatic impulses, but it tires quickly. Its energy depends on how rested and nourished you are, but more importantly, on clarity. If goals are vague, the prefrontal signals weaken, and the striatum's automated habits take over. The solution isn't endless willpower, it's specificity. Clear goals create clear anticipatory cues, which fire dopamine strategically. That's why defining a precise next action, like write the first sentence, not finish the chapter, boosts motivation instantly. You just gave your dopamine system something concrete to anticipate. This also helps explain why checking your phone feels urgent even when nothing's new. Your brain isn't addicted to information, it's addicted to the possibility of something good. That uncertainty keeps dopamine looping. Slot machines, viral feeds, even email, every one of them uses random reinforcement schedules, which neuroscience calls the most addictive pattern in behavioral conditioning. When rewards are unpredictable, dopamine stays high, permanently on the hook. Understanding this is freedom, though. Because once you realize anticipation is the real engine, you can design anticipation into your meaningful goals. For example, reward yourself visually by watching your progress grow each session, track workouts, tally study hours, mark streaks. Each data point gives your brain a fresh cue to expect satisfaction. Over time, the striatum internalizes that routine, turning deliberate actions into automatic drives. One more subtle point, dopamine doesn't operate alone. It works with serotonin and other neurochemicals, but dopamine is the initiator, the go signal. The cool part is that you can cultivate a healthier loop by pairing dopamine bursts with calm focus. Things like deep breathing or light movement raise baseline dopamine slightly while keeping receptors sensitive. So sustainable motivation is about rhythm, not spikes. You want steady pulses, not fireworks. Let me share a quick story. A designer I coached struggled with procrastination. He'd wait for inspiration, scroll, get frustrated, then binge work under stress. We reframed his system using these principles. Each day, before opening design software, he brewed coffee with a specific playlist, simple cue, consistent pleasure. That routine trained his brain to anticipate focus. Within 3 weeks, starting work felt rewarding automatically. Same brain chemistry, new stew. That's your takeaway. Dopamine is a teaching signal. It teaches your brain what's worth chasing. When you understand that, motivation stops being random luck and starts being predictable chemistry. You can use it to anchor attention exactly where you want it. And that brings us to the next part, why big goals, the ones meant to inspire you, often backfire instead. If dopamine thrives on frequent anticipation, then huge, distant objective. In the next section, we'll break down why long-term dreams feel exciting to imagine, but empty to execute, and how to fix that by designing sustainable, satisfying progress loops. Why big goals feel empty. Ever wonder why a giant dream, launching a business, writing a book, finishing a degree, feels amazing to picture but strangely hollow when you actually start working on it? It's not because you lost motivation overnight. It's because of how your dopamine system deals with time and distance. The brain loves now. It craves immediate anticipation, quick cues, concrete progress. When a goal sits months away, the dopamine circuits that drive motivation barely flicker. You're asking a chemistry system built for instant survival to care about something far in the future. It's like trying to get a puppy excited about retirement planning. This isn't your fault, it's evolutionary design. For most of human history, rewards came fast: finding food, climbing to safety, locating fresh water. Our ancestors needed a dopamine burst to act fast, not to sit tight for 12 weeks. So, the further away a goal's reward sits, the less your brain's motivational circuits prioritize it. That's why delayed gratification feels unnatural. You're literally pushing against the hardware. Every hour you spend on an essay, a workout plan, or savings goal forces the brain to compete with evolution's bias for short-term payoff. That's also why future you, future you, Satisfied. Future you. When researchers study self-control and long-term decision-making, they find that the prefrontal cortex handles planning, but the emotional brain barely recognizes your future self as you. It treats her like another person entirely, someone it can generously promise things to but rarely help. So when you say, "I'll start tomorrow," dopamine nods politely and then goes right back to scanning for instant gratification today. To your brain, future pleasure isn't a reward, it's a hypothesis. Compare that to short-term actions like checking a feed or eating a snack. Those deliver certainty. You get guaranteed micro-hits. A long-term goal? Total ambiguity. When exactly will the reward appear? What will it feel like? The prediction map stays fuzzy, so dopamine doesn't fire strong anticipation. In neuroscience terms, the expected value of the reward remains distant and undefined, which lowers your drive to act. The brain's motivational engine idles while your rational mind insists, "This is important." No contest, the chemistry wins. You've probably felt this while studying. The first few minutes of review feel heavy, dull, maybe even pointless. But get a few questions right or highlight something that clicks and suddenly energy out in the red dim. That's dopamine responding to evidence of reward, not mere intention. The same happens with fitness. Thinking about how great you'll look in 6 months does almost nothing. Noticing a stronger set or a better mile time triggers a rush. Until progress becomes visible and tangible, your brain just can't sustain excitement. Let's pull in some science. Studies on long-term goal motivation show that dopamine firing strengthens when progress markers appear. In other words, the system requires regular reinforcement to stay engaged. Without that, the anticipation loop collapses. Big goals fail not because they're bad, but because they lack built-in celebration points. Your brain goes quiet in the dead space between effort and payoff. To stay motivated, you have to give it something to look forward to now. Think of it like climbing a mountain. If all you focus on is the final summit, every step in between a primary. But if the path has scenic lookouts every half mile, you keep pushing because the next view is close enough to excite your wiring. Each checkpoint matters less than the feeling of proximity. Dopamine loves proximity. It fuels you when the next step looks rewarding, not when the finish line sits miles away. This neural quirk explains thousands of half-finished projects. At the start, imagination floods you with dopamine because the vision is new. Novelty equals anticipation. But as soon as you begin executing, novelty vanishes. The brain recalculates, reward far away, effort high, uncertainty huge. Dopamine drops, and suddenly the dream feels heavy. That's when procrastination whispers its favorite line, "Maybe I'll feel more inspired later." What you're really saying is, maybe my dopamine will come back. To fix that, you need to design your work in a way that reignites anticipation inside the process itself. The brain must see progress unfolding in real time. It can't stay motivated by abstraction. In practice, this means splitting big goals into small wins, micro milestones that deliver predictable dopamine updates. Every time you complete a measurable piece, you trigger the same chemistry that distractions once stole from you. It's not about lowering your ambitions, it's about feeding the system that fuels them. I had a client working on a 6-month certification program. At first, she studied in long stretches and felt burned out after each week. Her brain had no feedback loop. We restructured everything into daily targets, a practice quiz or a short reflection at the end of each study block. Each session gave her a reason to tick a box, record a streak, and feel a micro sense of success. Within 2 weeks, her study motivation doubled. She wasn't more disciplined, she just increased her dopamine frequency. There's another subtle reason big goals fall flat. Uncertainty shrinks dopamine drive. Your brain likes predictable rewards. Your brain likes predictable reward sky. Your brain likes predictable reward skies. When outcomes feel random, like wondering whether months of effort will pay off, dopamine hesitates. That's why games, apps, and social media dominate attention. They manipulate reward schedules precisely. For your goals, you have to create predictable wins where none naturally exist. Use measurable metrics, pages written, workouts logged, savings milestones. Every clear metric converts randomness into certainty, which reignites the dopamine. Notice how this explains the emotional slump after reaching a major milestone, too. You'd think finally achieving something huge would flood you with dopamine, right? Instead, you often feel oddly numb afterward. That's because the pursuit, not the possession, carries the chemistry. The reward signals shut off almost immediately once the outcome is certain. It's the brain's way of conserving energy for the next chase. The excitement was in the climb. To sustain motivation beyond that moment, you need new, slightly bigger, or different goals ready to activate fresh anticipation loops. Let me add a quick comparison to make this stick. Imagine your dopamine like a GPS recalculating every time you move forward. If the destination marker stays far away, the feedback register feels sluggish. But when you break the journey into small checkpoints, your brain gets rapid, "you're on track" signals. That keeps anticipation alive, which keeps energy flowing. Big goals you only chase in your head? No updates, no dopamine, no drive. So instead of asking, how do I get disciplined enough to chase this giant thing, ask, how can I make progress feel close and visible? Shrink the distance between action and satisfaction. Each win is a metabolic recharge for motivation. Stack enough of them, and suddenly the big goal that once felt dull stars. Here's the transition point. Once you understand that your brain needs frequent reinforcement, the next step is learning how to build those consistent micro payoffs consciously. That's the foundation of the next section, the science of small wins. Because if you can train your dopamine to celebrate progress daily instead of waiting for perfection, you'll finally unlock that steady, self-sustaining motivation that used to feel out of reach. The science of reach. Now that you know why big goals often fizzle out, let's flip the equation and talk about the strategy that keeps motivation alive, the science of small wins. This idea isn't about lowering your standards or settling for less. It's about speaking your brain's language. Remember, dopamine thrives on anticipation and proximity, not size. So, when you design your environment for short, frequent victories, you're not just boosting morale, you're literally engineering steady dopamine flow. Here's what neuroscience tells us. Each time you make measurable progress, even a tiny bit, dopamine neurons fire in response to that perceived improvement. They don't care whether you ran a marathon or just put on your shoes to start training. The brain simply recognizes a forward step toward a gut and dopamine neuron step toward a gate dopamine neurons. Studies on goal motivation show that small milestones maintain consistent dopamine signaling, whereas waiting for one grand result causes the system to drop off and lose steam. In simple terms, the smaller the feedback gap, the stronger the motivation loop. Picture it like a video game. You level up often, you get visual confirmation, and you keep going because the next reward feels close. That same principle applies to real life. If you make your progress visible and trackable, your brain interprets each update as evidence of reward. And the more often that happens, the more your dopamine system predicts future satisfaction, creating a self-fueling cycle. Essentially, you're transforming ambition into addictive momentum. This is where the chunking technique comes in, a practical approach backed by motivational research. Chunking means breaking your massive abstract goal into micro-challenges that your brain can handle. For instance, instead of get fit, you decide, do 15 minutes of strength work today. Instead of finish the thesis, it becomes outline the first section. Those smaller frames turn uncertainty into clarity, and clarity triggers anticipation. Because once your brain can see the next reward clearly, it stops hesitating. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you're trying to get back into studying. Your old approach was to tell yourself, I'll review 3 chapters tonight. That's intimidating because your brain predicts fatigue before payoff. But if you shift it to, I'll answer 5 practice questions, then check my accuracy, you've just created 2 dopamine events, starting and evaluating. 5 questions feel short enough to start, and checking your success provides a micro reward. Those little pulses of feedback multiply your engagement because anticipation stays active throughout the session. Do that repeatedly, and studying stops being a drag and starts feeling like a momentum game. What's beautiful about small wins is how they change perception. Each one tells your brain, this effort works. It's positive feedback in chemical form. And as neuroscientists note, repeated signals of success strengthen connections between your prefrontal cortex, the planner, and your striatum, the habit former. Over time, this wiring reduces the friction of starting hard tasks because your brain associates them with predictable payoffs. Basically, you're upgrading discipline into instinct. Now, here's a warning most people overlook. One common mistake is waiting for motivation before acting. That logic reverses the dopamine equation. Motivation doesn't precede progress, it follows it. Dopamine amplifies after you've demonstrated evidence of movement. So if you sit around waiting to feel ready, your brain sits idle because there's no cue for anticipation. But once you take a micro-action, like opening your notes, tying your sneakers, drafting one paragraph, you spark the chemical cascade that tells your system, we're in motion. Motivation grows because dopamine starts working for you, not against you. Think of these micro-actions as starter motors. They don't require big emotional energy. They just get the chemical cycle rolling. And since small wins create momentum, they also protect you from burnout. Instead of working in long, draining bursts, you're recharging motivation through regular progress feedback. That's why marathon runners love breaking long routes into checkpoints. It prevents psychological collapse by keeping reward intervals tight. You can mimic the same pattern in any area: work projects, language learning, fitness, even budgeting. Let's look at fitness to make it visual. If your only proof of progress is the number on the scale, you might stay discouraged for weeks. But if you celebrate improvements, one extra rep, better form, slightly less fatigue, each click of progress becomes a mini victory. That subtle reframing delivers continual satisfaction, which fuels consistency, and consistency is the true multiplier for brain change. You no longer rely on rare peaks of excitement, you live in a steady rhythm of achievement. This approach wires directly into what neuroscientists call experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Every small success strengthens pathways that predict reward from effort. The stronger the prediction, the easier it becomes to start next time. Eventually, the equation flips. Not doing the task feels uncomfortable because your brain expects the chemical payoff of progress. That's how habits take root, not through force, but through repeated small wins that reshape expectation. A story from one of my clients drives this home. She was training for a half marathon, but kept skipping her runs because she felt overwhelmed. We reframed her routine into micro victories. Instead of measuring success by how far she ran, she measured it by how many minutes she stayed consistent. The first week's target was just 10 minutes a day, with a visible streak tracker on the wall. Every checkmark triggered a satisfaction loop. Within a month, she ran longer naturally, because quitting mid-flow felt like breaking the chain. Her dopamine now anticipated reward in the act of running itself, not in the final medal months away. That's the magic formula: reward progress, not results. When progress itself feels rewarding, the result becomes inevitable. Each repetition strengthens the circuit until the hard thing becomes the satisfying thing. So whether you're building a business or cleaning your kitchen, the rule holds. Reward the behavior you want repeated, immediately, and visibly. Another quick tip: pair recognition with data. Humans love numbers because numbers make improvement obvious. If you're studying, track the number of sessions completed. If you're saving money, track weekly totals. Visual metrics transform invisible growth into concrete cues, and those cues constantly reignite dopamine by showing that success is closer than it appears. It's the brain's version of a level-up sound. Here's why this works better than pure affirmation. Compliments tell you you're good, but data shows you're progressing. Dopamine cares about prediction accuracy, not compliments. So the more you can quantify improvement, the more your brain trusts that effort equals reward, and trust equals motivation. Let's tie it together. Small visible wins maintain dopamine-based motivation by shortening the feedback loop, keeping anticipation alive, and building neuroplastic connections that favor effort. You can't outthink your biology, you have to collaborate with it. That's why every big achievement is just stacked micro victories your brain could digest one by one. All right, now that you know how to trigger consistent dopamine from tiny steps, let's make those steps emotionally meaningful. Because chemistry alone isn't enough, your senses and emotions amplify this process even more. In the next section, we'll explore dopamine anchoring, where you pair effort with pleasurable cues. That's the twist that turns hard work into something your brain actually craves. Dopamine anchoring, making hard tasks rewarding. All right, let's take everything we've learned about small wins and now make hard work feel good. This is where dopamine anchoring comes in, a practical strategy for pairing pleasure with effort so your brain starts releasing reward chemistry during the work, not after. Think of it as wiring your brain to enjoy the grind itself. When done right, this isn't just a mindset trick, it's a behavioral conditioning technique proven to enhance focus, consistency, and long-term motivation. Here's the basic idea. Your brain learns through associate. If you consistently mix something enjoyable with a task that feels difficult, over time your nervous system begins anticipating that pleasure as soon as the task starts. That anticipation triggers dopamine, which transforms how you experience effort. Psychologists sometimes call this classical conditioning, but dopamine anchoring gives it a conscious upgrade. You choose the cues and rewards that link pleasure with productive effort. For example, think about the scent of coffee during a morning work session, or a favorite playlist that always plays when you study. At first, those cues just make the experience a little nicer. But after repetition, the relationship flips. The smell or the music alone can spark focus and motivation before you've even started. That's your dopamine system firing in anticipation of a pattern it knows leads to reward. You've basically turned sensory pleasure into an ignition key for effort. Neuroscientific research confirms this mechanism. Dopamine rises not from the reward itself, but from the prediction of reward based on familiar cues. Each time you pair a positive stimulus with productive behavior, you build a circuit linking that cue, task, accomplishment. Over weeks, the cue alone becomes enough to trigger dopamine flow. This means your brain begins rewarding you for beginning, which is the hardest part of any task. You've turned initiation into its own satisfaction loop. Let's look at a real example. During the pandemic, a teacher I coached struggled to grade papers at home. No structure, tons of resistance. We experimented with dopamine anchoring. She burned a specific herbal candle only during grading sessions, paired with a cold, sparkling drink. Within 2 weeks, the combination became the cue. Lighting the candle flipped her state into grading mode. Her brain had learned to expect reward. What used to feel dreadful became oddly calming, even satisfying. That's the power of consistent sensory-based anchors. The trick is choosing anchors that are uplifting, not overstimulating. The goal isn't to blast your system with huge dopamine spikes, it's to create subtle, sustainable pleasures. Simple things work best. Music with steady rhythm, the light scent of citrus, a warm drink, or a specific workspace setup that feels good to be in. Think comfort cues, not escape mechanisms. Avoid addictive stimuli like endless background videos or constant sugar snacks. Those overwhelm the system and make you reliant on external hits rather than the task itself. Anchors should enhance focus, not replace it. Consistency is a use the same cue every time you perform that specific type of work. The repetition strengthens the association pathway through what neuroscientists call experience-dependent neuroplasticity, the process your brain uses to rewire itself based on repeated experience. Over time, dopamine begins to rise before you even start because your brain anticipates enjoyment. You've turned effort into something that feels self-reinforcing instead of self-draining. Let's compare it to gym training. Suppose every workout closes with an energizing ritual, cooling down with your favorite upbeat song while noting your best lift or run stat of the day. That song becomes linked to accomplishment and physical relief. Play it again tomorrow at warm-up, and your brain will start flooding dopamine even before the first set. You basically hacked the pre-workout dread by priming your reward system in advance. After a month, your body will crave that start cue because it predicts satisfaction. Now here's where most people mess up. They treat anchors as distractions instead of reinforcements. For example, blasting. Random social media videos while studying might make the moment easier, but kills the anchor loop. Your brain links dopamine to the entertainment, not the work. Effective anchors must connect to the act of effort, not compete with it. The best cues fade into the background. They're consistent enough for your body to recognize, but quiet enough for your focus to dominate. To test whether an anchor works, notice your immediate reaction to starting to occur. Do you feel slight eagerness instead of dread? That's your cue becoming conditioned. Do you find that skipping the cue makes it harder to get in flow? That's also confirmation. Once you've got an anchor working, you can add more layers: light stretch before writing, same beverage before meetings, specific instrumental playlist for coding. Each repetition refines the neural script: cue, anticipation, action, reward. You're no longer forcing motive. You're no longer forcing motive. Let's connect this back to the research on dopamine anchoring. Studies highlight 3 rules for success: personalization, consistency, and emotional authenticity. Personalization means your anchors should truly please you. There's no universal focus scent or magic soundtrack. The dopamine system responds to whatever your brain personally finds pleasurable and safe. Consistency builds the link. Identical repetition strengthens the synaptic bond. Emotional authenticity seals it. The pleasure must feel real, not forced. Your nervous system can tell the difference. For anyone balancing remote work or hybrid schedules, dopamine anchoring can also structure your environment. Many remote workers accidentally blur rest and focus spaces, weakening those associations. Simple fix: reserve a specific setup, like a certain desk layout or lighting temperature, for deep work sessions. When you return to that setup, your brain clicks into reward mode automatically because the physical setting predicts engagement and achievement. Here's a quick micro story. A college student I worked with could never start essays without procrastinating for hours. We created a ritual she genuinely liked: lighting a faint vanilla candle and sipping matcha while classical scores played in the background. That blend became her start signal. 2 weeks later, she laughed, saying, "I crave essay time now because I get to create that vibe." The essays didn't get easier. Her brain just linked the experience to comfort and small satisfaction. Over months, the candle scent alone triggered focus. Like a Pavlovi, when selecting anchors, rotate gently to keep them fresh if you start to feel numb. Slight novelty keeps dopamine sensitive. For instance, change playlists within the same genre or swap one sensory cue seasonally. You don't want tolerance to flatten the effect. Protect the association's meaning by using the cue only for that activity. If you listen to your focus playlist while doom scrolling, the brain will muddle the map, and motivation will muddle the map, and motivation will disperquasion. Keep sacred cues sacred. Ultimately, dopamine anchoring merges biology with design. You're teaching your reward system that effort equals comfort, not struggle. Over time, even thinking about the work evokes mild pleasure because the brain expects the familiar pattern. That's exactly how people fall in love with routines. They've chemically connected them to safety and satisfaction. It's also why disciplined creators or athletes seem effortlessly consistent. Their nervous systems anticipate enjoyment in motion. Here's a simple framework to practice starting today. Step 1. Choose a sensory cue, a smell, sound, or flavor you enjoy mildly. Step 2. Pair it deliberately with one focused task every day for at least 2 weeks. Step 3. Track your initial mood when starting and note any shift toward eagerness. If that shift appears, congratulations. You've built your first dopamine anchor. Stack more as you grow. One for study, one for workouts, one for creative flow. Each cue becomes a customized entry point into motivation. So what's the science saying in plain English? Through associative learning, your brain fires dopamine not just from outcomes, but from patterns of sensory predictability linked to effort. Over repetition, those patterns reshape motivation circuits in the striatum and prefrontal cortex, making hard tasks trigger pleasure automatically. You no longer have to chase willpower because the chemistry itself is on your side. And this sets the stage for the next breakthrough: how to make these anchored, rewarding behaviors permanent through repetition and neuroplasticity. We'll see how consistent cue reward cycles sculpt new neural pathways, so the work that once required conscious effort becomes wired into habit and feels natural to sustain. That's where the next section leads us: rewiring habits through adult neuroplasticity. Rewiring habits through neuroplasticity. Now that you know how dopamine anchors can make effort feel rewarding, let's pull back the curtain on why that effect lasts: the science of neuroplasticity. Most people think once you reach adulthood, your brain's wiring is set like hardened concrete, but modern neuroscience paints a more optimistic picture. Your neural circuits remain flexible for your entire life. They just need repetition, emotion, and attention to reshape. That's what neuroplasticity means: the brain's capacity to physically change in response to experience. Every repeated thought, emotion, or behavior strengthens the connections that made it happen. You're not stuck with the motivation patterns you have. You're training them every day, consciously or not. So how does this tie into dopamine? Dopamine acts as the teacher molecule for neuroplasticity. When your brain senses dopamine alongside effort or success, it tags that moment as valuable and worth repeating. The neurons involved in that behavior fire together more strongly, and, just like the old saying, neurons that fire together wire together. Over weeks and months, that repeated firing builds thicker, faster pathways between regions like your prefrontal cortex, where decisions are made, and your striatum, where habits live. That link is the bridge between I want to do this and I do this automatically. Here's the process in practical terms. Step 1. Repetition establishes the loop. Step 2. Dopamine and positive emotion mark it as meaningful. Step 3. Attention focuses energy on those neurons, further strengthening the pathway. Each time you repeat your newly anchored ritual, coffee smell plus writing session, candle plus deep work, your brain etches the connection a little deeper until it stops requiring effort altogether. Before long, what was once a conscious start becomes reflexive. That's the biochemical definition of discipline. Let's weave in research here. Studies show that for adults, habit formation varies widely, anywhere from about 60 to 150 days depending on complexity. Simple actions like taking vitamins solidify quickly. Complex patterns like exercising or studying an hour daily need more repetition and a stable context. What matters most, though, isn't speed but consistency. Breaking the loop occasionally doesn't erase progress, but frequent inconsistency resets dopamine patterns, making it tougher for the brain to lock in that behavior. The habit doesn't care about your intensity, it cares about your regularity. Think of it like upgrading a dirt path into a highway. Each repetition lays down another layer of pavement. Skip too many days and plants start growing back through the cracks. Keep traffic flowing daily, even light traffic, and soon the path becomes the brain's go-to route. That's how neuroplasticity physically rewires effort into ease. Let me share an example that captures this. A marketing freelancer I coached used dopamine anchoring to enjoy client writing sessions but wanted the consistency to stick. We built a morning launch ritual, same music, same drink, same 10-minute outline routine at 9 a.m. sharp every week. At first, it was mechanical, zero emotional spark. But she tracked it for 60 days without skipping more than once. By week 3, her brain had already begun predicting satisfaction from that sequence. By week 7, she caught herself slipping into work mode automatically as soon as the playlist started. That's neuroplasticity in action, the brain rewarding reliability by converting it into autopilot. Emotion intensifies this process too. According to neuroscientists, when you attach even mild joy or pride to a new behavior, the accompanying dopamine surge reinforces synaptic change faster. That means you should amplify emotional signals whenever you complete the routine. Say out loud, "Nice, that felt good," or visualize tomorrow's repeat. Those tiny acknowledgments flood your brain with the reassurance that effort equals reward. It's not cheesy, it's chemical reinforcement. Every emotional note adds a coat of neural paint to the habit wall. Here's something people often misunderstand. Neuroplasticity doesn't require giant effort spikes. In fact, the brain consolidates habits most effectively through frequent, low-friction exposure rather than intense bursts. Doing a short session daily beats a marathon session once a week because you're keeping dopamine and attention flowing through the same route routinely. Think of practice as watering a plant. It needs regularity, not floods. The power is in lifestyle rhythm, not occasional heroics. Consistency also explains why environment stability helps. Performing the same ritual in the same place adds contextual cues that speed up learning. When you sit at the same desk, with the same playlist, your hippocampus, responsible for context memory, tells the striatum, this setting predictest. That environmental memory becomes another neural shortcut. Change locations constantly and you slow the wiring process because your brain has to reacquire context signals each time. So when possible, create a consistent environment for any habit you want automated. Same chair, same scent, same start sequence. These external cues become part of the habit's neural fingerprint. There's another layer here, attention. Mindful repetition, Being present while doing the task activates more widespread brain regions, especially the prefrontal cingulate network, where learning integration happens. Mindless repetition still wires patterns but less efficiently. That's why reflecting briefly afterward or journaling about what felt good accelerates the shift. It merges reflection with emotion, two potent neuroplastic drivers. In practice, even a 30-second end cap note like, "That felt easier today," can amplify long-term wiring. Let's circle back to dopamine's teaching role. When the brain receives dopamine after effort, it records that sequence was valuable. But the prediction gets stronger only if the timing is consistent. Unpredictable reinforcement, say, sometimes rewarding yourself, sometimes neglecting reflection, confuses the map. Predictable cues lead to cleaner pathways. This mirrors the same learning logic behind skill mastery in sports or music. Repetition with emotional consistency equals expertise. Your habits are mental skills obeying identical neuroscience. A quick analogy will make this crystal clear. Imagine the neurons responsible for your gym habits as musicians in a band. At first, they each play offbeat, motivation, planning, physical action, satisfaction all scattered. Every time you repeat the workout routine, dopamine acts as the conductor tapping the baton, syncing them a little closer. Miss several rehearsals and they drift apart. Keep rehearsing regularly and soon they perform automatically, perfectly in sync. That's when you can work out without inner debate. That's neuroplastic harmony. You might be wondering, what if I backslide? Here's the encouraging truth. Once a pathway is built, it doesn't vanish overnight. It just weakens from disuse. Restarting the behavior quickly revives it because those neural roads still exist. They're simply covered with a light layer of dust. That means recovery is always faster than creation. Even small restarts re-energize dormant circuits if you reinforce them with cues and positive emotion So, how do you intentionally apply this? First, identify one rhythm you already established with dopamine anchoring, say your focus playlist before writing. Commit to performing it daily for at least 60 days, even on low-energy days. Second, celebrate the smallest completion moments by marking them physically, a tick on a tracker, or a short self-praise phrase. Those combine repetition, emotion, and reward prediction into one clean neuroprediction, into one clean neuroprediction, into one clean neuroprediction, into one clean neuroplasma. Third, maintain environmental consistency. Same time, same place, same cue increases predictability, and predictability multiplies learning speed. Eventually, a funny thing happens. The behavior stops demanding deliberation. You find yourself setting up without thinking because your brain concluded, this action leads to good feelings. You've replaced the need for willpower with a physiological reflex. That's adult neuroplasticity working to your advantage, transforming chosen effort into automatic behavior through chemical repetition. Once that neural foundation solidifies, sustaining motivation becomes less about chasing spikes and more about keeping flow. In the next section, we'll explore how long-term motivation relies not just on dopamine but also on balance, with serotonin and mindfulness maintaining patience and preventing burnout. You've learned how to rewire circuits for consistent effort. Now we'll focus on how to protect that motivation for the long run so your progress keeps compounding year after year. Maintaining dopamine for long-term goals. By now, you know how to create dopamine-driven habits that actually make hard work feel rewarding. But the real challenge isn't sparking motivation, it's keeping it. Once the excitement of novelty fades, even the best wired loops keep cake. This is where long-term dopamine management comes in, balancing stimulation with stability, effort with recovery, and ambition with patience. If you've ever built momentum only to burn out or lose interest halfway through a project, you've seen what happens when dopamine runs unchecked without balance. Let's start with a key concept from neuroscience. Dopamine works in cycles, not straight lines. You can think of it like a wave. The rise comes with anticipation. The fall signals rest and reflection. When you chase only the highs, constant urgency, endless achievement, you deplete dopamine faster than your receptors can reset. Motivation tanks, focus scatters, and suddenly even simple tasks feel heavy. The secret to endurance is to let those waves rise and fall naturally, instead of forcing permanent peaks. That's where serotonin, your steadying neurotransmitter, plays its role. Research shows serotonin and dopamine form a biological partnership. Dopamine is the accelerator and serotonin is the brake. Dopamine pushes you to seek the next reward. Serotonin helps you feel content with progress so far. Without serotonin balance, pursuit turns into compulsion, which leads straight to burnout. People chasing constant wins mix up stimulation with growth. True consistency, neurologically speaking, requires both chemicals to stay in rhythm. You want to oscillate between drive and satisfaction, not live at either extreme. Now let's ground that in daily life. Suppose you're working on a long-term goal, like publishing a book or training for a marathon. In the early stage, fresh novelty fuels your dopamine. Each new idea or training milestone new idea or training milestone. But after weeks of repetition, the brain's novelty signal declines. Unless you deliberately introduce a serotonin-boosting recovery, things like reflection, gratitude, rest, or mindful enjoyment, your dopamine system won't reset properly. That's when you start oscillating between procrastination and overwork. Sustainable motivation grows from recovery as much as effort. So how do you keep your chemistry cycling smoothly? Let's break it into 4 key strategies: rhythm, reflection, celebration, and recalibration. First, rhythm. Create a predictable work-reward schedule. Remember, dopamine likes structure. Setting consistent times for focus, breaks, and rest stabilizes the prefrontal cortex and prevents reward volatility. Think of it like interval training for your mind. A focused 90-minute work sprint followed by a deliberate reward, like a short walk or a stretch, keeps your dopamine receptors replenished instead of overstimulated. Random indulgence drains energy, structured recovery restores it. Second, reflection. Every major neuroscientific review on habit formation emphasizes awareness as the glue for long-term consistency. When you reflect, you activate brain regions tied to learning integration, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex. Taking 2 minutes after a task to jot down what worked or how you feel isn't just mindfulness, it's biochemical consolidation. You're linking accomplishment with internal satisfaction, which nudges serotonin up to meet dopamine halfway. That's the balance we want, excitement paired with contentment. Third, celebration. It might sound fluffy, but recognizing small wins protects motivation from fading. When you consciously note success, verbally, visually, or socially, you refresh dopamine patterns that risk going stale from repetition. A quick checkmark on a tracker or telling a friend, "I nailed that session," isn't ego, it's chemistry maintenance. The brain re-registers the activity as rewarding again, ensuring future anticipation doesn't fade. Without those reminders, your nervous system forgets what's satisfying. Finally, recalibration. Long projects eventually stretch beyond their original excitement zones. That's normal. The trick is to periodically reintroduce novelty or adjust goals slightly to revive prediction error, the small surprise dopamine uses to stay active. Add a new challenge, experiment with a different format, change environments for a week. Slight unpredictability reignites engagement while keeping the structure intact. Balance familiarity with micro-innovation. That's how pros avoid creative fatigue while staying consistent. Let's pull in a story to illustrate how all this fits together. A medical student I advised used to cram endlessly, burn out mid-semester, then crash. We built a neurochemical rhythm instead. Study 90 minutes, take a mindful 10-minute walk with calming music, serotonin time. After finishing each topic, she wrote a single-line reflection about what clicked. That little act triggered satisfaction each day, preventing dopamine depletion. She called it her brain cool down. By finals, she noticed she wasn't dreading the grind anymore. The cycle of push and ease kept her motivation steady across 3 months. Small routines, big chem stop as ox, big chem to small routines, big chem. Now, here's something counterintuitive. Too much focus on dopamine optimization backfires. Chasing perpetual excitement causes habituation, the flattening of response due to overstimulation. Think of an artist addicted to inspiration highs or an entrepreneur who only feels alive during launches. In both cases, baseline motivation collapses between peaks. To maintain effective dopamine, aim for moderate, rhythmic engagement, not endless thrill. The brain learns more efficiently when stimulation is spaced and balanced by calm states. That's where serotonin and even mild boredom resensitize your reward system. Another underestimated factor in long-term motivation is self-compassion. When you mess up, skip a day, fall behind, or plateau, guilt suppresses dopamine by triggering stress hormones like cortisol. Self-forgiveness, on the other hand, preserves prefrontal activity and resets motivation faster. Neuroscientists studying habit relapse note that compassionate thinkers resume goals nearly twice as fast as perfectionists because they return to neutral chemistry instead of dwelling in depletion. The practical takeaway: treat every slip as feedback, not failure. Calm brains relearn quicker than shamed ones. You also need occasional rewards that aren't productive. A hobby, social moment, or unplugged weekend balances neurochemical tone. Because if you associate dopamine exclusively with productivity, rest starts to feel wrong. That undermines creativity and longevity. Scheduled enjoyment reminds the brain that pleasure isn't forbidden, it's part of the system. One client built a Sunday curiosity ritual, reading something unrelated to work with coffee by a window. She swore it doubled her weekly focus by letting her dopamine coast peacefully before another push. That's biometrically sensible. Periodic low-stimulus joy preserves receptor sensitivity. Tracking progress supports this balance too. Instead of endless goal chasing, design visible feedback cycles that highlight growth pace. A progress graph, an updated portfolio, or before-after notes tell the brain the pursuit is working. Without metrics, dopamine loses reference points and you drift. Visible data combined with reflection sessions provides both dopaminergic evidence and serotonergic satisfaction, a motivational homeostasis. Here's a mini framework for long-term projects: predictable rhythm, fixed focus and rest cycles daily. Reflective closure, short, honest review after each session. Visible celebration, mark milestones, however small. Active recalibration, inject novelty monthly to renew anticipation. Serotonin recovery, deliberate calm or gratitude moments daily. Follow that rhythm and your motivation graph will look like steady waves instead of erratic spikes. One more science insight: chronic stress toys with your dopamine system. When cortisol levels stay high, dopaminergic neurons in the midbrain become less responsive, making both joy and drive harder to feel. That's why burnout feels like emotional numbness. Building micro-rest, 5 slow breaths between tasks, quick walks outside, or brief laughter breaks isn't self-indulgence, it's receptor maintenance. Calm restores sensitivity. Ambition needs oxygen to burn clean. Let's add a real-world example of lasting success. A startup founder I coached used to binge productivity during investor crunches and then crash for weeks. We restructured her weeks using the rhythm model: Monday through Thursday, high-focus deep work blocks, Friday half-day reflection and planning, weekends fully off and tech light. Within 2 months, she reported steadier energy and fewer slump Mondays. Her dopamine patterns normalized because predictable rest kept serotonin stable. Consistency now felt easier than chaos because the brain learned what to expect. Remember, the goal isn't infinite drive, it's sustainable curiosity. Motivation longevity happens when dopamine and serotonin dance in sync, pursuit followed by appreciation. Think of it like breathing. Inhale is dopamine, exhale is serotonin. You can't live on one without the other. So how do you re-trigger dopamine periodically on multi-month goals? Use cyclical novelty. For study routines, rotate subjects weekly or change question formats. For fitness, introduce new movements or milestone photos. For creative projects, share progress publicly to refresh social reinforcement. Each tweak reignites prediction error without scrapping your structure. Progress feels exciting again because your brain meets small, adaptive surprises. To close this section, here's the mindset shift. Consistency outperforms intensity in rewiring motivation. Long-term achievers aren't more disciplined, they're more balanced. They protect their receptors, integrate recovery, and honor the chemistry of patience. Reflect often, celebrate steadily, rest deliberately, and reintroduce small variations when stagnation appears. That's how you keep dopamine cooperating for years instead of weeks. Now that you know how to maintain a stable motivation rhythm, let's take this system into real life. In the next part, we'll apply all these neuroscience principles: cue design, anchoring, neuroplastic repetition, and maintenance cycles to everyday contexts like study, fitness, and work, so you can see exactly how this rewired chemistry turns into real-world performance. Applying the system to real life. Theory only matters if it changes behavior. Theory only matters if it changes it. So let's take all this neuroscience, dopamine cues, anchors, small wins, and rhythm, and show how it looks in the places you actually live: studying, fitness, and work. Once you see the same loop appear everywhere, you'll realize motivation isn't about feeling inspired, it's about designing consistent chemistry. Let's start with studying because it's the perfect example of delayed gratification. When you open a textbook, the payoff feels distant: exams, grades, career steps months away. Your dopamine system yawns. To fix that, you have to create short feedback loops that make the brain see progress today. Try this pattern: define one chapter or topic, set a visible start cue like lighting a specific study candle or putting on one soundtrack, and then study for a single tithe. At the end of each block, spend 2 minutes doing active recall. Write 5 summary points from memory. That little success pulse becomes your dopamine win. Then mark it on a tracker or streak board. Each check mark says to your brain, effort equals reward. Over time, starting the session alone sparks the same anticipation because the cue and success memory fuse together. You can amplify this by adding small novelty twists weekly. For instance, change study locations slightly or reward completion with a low stimulus pleasure, like a quick stretch and favorite tea. Controlled change keeps your dopamine responsive. A student I mentored used sticky notes to record every mini concept she mastered. Her wall became a color-coded feedback map. Watching it fill triggered progress anticipation each day. She didn't suddenly become disciplined, she engineered visible dopamine anchors that made learning satisfying. Now take the same loop to fitness. Exercise naturally rewards the body, but the brain often resists the start because effort precedes endorphins. Dopamine anchoring fixes that. Choose one ritual that stays constant before every workout: same warm-up playlist, same pre-training drink, same short affirmation. Those cues gradually shift your state from reluctance to readiness because they predict satisfaction. Layer in micro wins by logging visible numbers, reps, minutes, or consistency streaks, not just physical changes. Each log event delivers another dopamine drip. Neuroscience shows that tracking tangible data fires the same reward circuits as actual improvement because the brain perceives graphs as evidence of accomplishment. To maintain that rhythm long-term, add serotonin-style reflection. After workouts, take 1 mindful minute to note something you appreciated, maybe better control or smoother breathing. That small reflection satisfies the calm half of your chemistry, telling your system the effort was meaningful, not endless chase. People who build this into their routine report long-term consistency even when motivation naturally fluctuates. Their brains expect both activation and rest, complete cycles instead of one endless push. Here's a story that pulls it together. A client preparing for her first 10K struggled with early training boredom. We built a dopamine-friendly structure: upbeat playlist as cue, visual tracker for distance, and a simple ritual of cold water plus reflection journal after each run. Within weeks, she described craving the start tone of her playlist because it predicted positive mood. 6 weeks in, running had switched from willpower to reflex. That's chemical rewiring in sneakers. Next, work projects. This is where distractions compete hard for dopamine. To win, you make progress visible and social. Break any project into tiny deliverables with public acknowledgement loops, share updates in a group chat, or log development steps visually. Each mini recognition fuels anticipation. Corporate reward studies even show that peer recognition doubles dopamine engagement compared to solitary celebration because social bonding releases oxytocin, which amplifies dopamine's teaching signal. So when coworkers praise momentum, not perfection, everyone's motivation lifts. You can pair this with personalized dopamine anchors in your workspace. Keep one stimulus consistent, maybe a subtle citrus diffuser, the same focus playlist, or a particular workspace setup you reserve solely for deep work. Over time, entering that environment alone primes your brain for engagement. One software engineer I coached used a small desk lamp that switched to warm light only during focus sessions. The simple glow cue trained his nervous system so thoroughly that the lamp switch became his ready signal. Cheap, effective neuroscience at home. For creative professionals, deadlines often blend pressure with excitement, dopamine highs followed by crashes. To stabilize that, build reflection points after submissions. Write a quick note: what went smoothly, and what to improve next round. That post-reward reflection triggers serotonin and prevents the dopamine drop that causes post-project slumps. When practiced regularly, creativity feels steady rather than boom and bust. Let's not forget daily life beyond productivity. The same wiring applies to habits like cleaning, cooking, or financial management. Suppose you hate laundry. Pair the task with mild sensory pleasure, a podcast and favorite drink only allowed during folding time. That's dopamine anchoring. And with visual closure, stacked clothes visible in color order or a check on your planner, that's your progress cue. 2 cycles in, dread shrinks. 5 cycles in, the ritual carries built-in reward anticipation. You've reframed drudgery as comfort through association. In money management, use measurable milestones. Instead of waiting 6 months to feel rewarded for saving, create weekly update rituals. Track progress visually on a graph, celebrate every improvement no matter how small, and set one micro goal to refresh anticipation each month, like hitting a round number or paying off a small debt. The predictability and visibility keep your dopamine system alive in an area where rewards are naturally delayed. Now, let's overlay everything into a day-to-day synthesis. Morning dopamine cues signal start, micro goals provide progress hits, sensory anchors flood anticipation, reflection rebalances chemistry before fatigue sets in. In practice, it might look like this. Sip morning coffee while setting 3 clear objectives, cue and goal clarity. Perform 2 focused work blocks with visible check marks, small wins. Insert 1 anchor ritual, say a certain playlist or candle to re-engage focus later, and end the day with a brief reflection to stabilize serotonin. Done consistently, that routine retrains your entire motivation circuit from seeking distraction to finding energy in progress itself. You'll notice one meta shift. Tasks stop feeling like isolated battles of will. They merge into one repeating experience, the pursuit, anticipation, reward rhythm. A student finishing notes, an athlete completing reps, a designer ticking tasks, all share that identical neurological story. Cue predicts effort. Effort produces feedback. Feedback signals satisfaction. Satisfaction reinforces cue. Productivity diversity, but chemical unity. Here's the cool test of whether your system's working. When you find yourself wanting to begin instead of bargaining for motivation, you've crossed from conscious management to automated drive. That's your striatum taking the reins, dopamine and neuroplasticity working silently in your favor. You won't always feel ecstatic, but neutral and starting anyway becomes default. That is the milestone worth chasing. To emphasize, this isn't about becoming hyper-productive every hour. It's about creating an internal ecosystem where action feels natural and rest feels earned. You're designing motivation that renews itself through structure, not guilt. The same way a balanced diet stabilizes blood sugar, a balanced cue reward system stabilizes drive. A small experiment to try tonight: choose one ordinary activity you resist, maybe planning, stretching, or cleaning. Add one pleasant cue, a sound, scent, or flavor, and promise yourself immediate recognition afterward, even if it's just writing done. Do it 3 days straight with the same cue. By day 4, check how much easier it feels to start. That change in ease is your dopamine loop responding. It's proof that you can teach your brain enthusiasm on demand. Real transformation isn't sparks of motivation, it's systems that make sparks unnecessary. Once your environment, anchors, and reward loops sync, you move through tasks with quiet momentum. The same neuroscience that once kept you scrolling now keeps you progressing. And the beauty is, this process scales anywhere. School, gym, office, home, because the brain speaks one universal language: consistent cues, measurable progress, emotionally tagged reward. So going forward, remember this formula: cue, chunk, anchor, reflect, repeat that daily, and motivation stops being mysterious. It becomes chemistry running in alignment with your goals. In the next section, we'll turn that formula into a repeatable daily structure, a simple framework that installs these loops into your schedule so dopamine management stops being theory and starts being lifestyle. The Daily Dopamine Framework. Now that you know how to apply dopamine management to different areas of your life, it's time to combine everything into one clear daily system. I call this the Daily Dopamine Framework. It's the practical blueprint that turns neuroscience into structure, so every day you're feeding your motivation loop instead of draining it. Let's walk through how to design a single day that automatically generates momentum without needing constants. Step 1. The morning cue ritual. The brain loves predictability. Begin each day with a sensory cue that signals start mode. It could be a scent, sound, light, or taste, whatever makes your brain recognize it's time to engage. For me, it's the smell of coffee, a glass of water, and 5 minutes of calm breathing. That combination is my switch from passive to active. The trick is consistency. Use the same cue every morning. Over weeks, dopamine starts firing the moment that cue appears, before you've done any real work. Suddenly, morning grogginess feels temporary because your nervous system already anticipates progress. Second, define and chunk one clear goal. Instead of a giant to-do list that overwhelms you, pick one major outcome for the day and break it into 3 micro steps. Remember how the brain thrives on small wins and visible progress? When you chunk goals into pieces small enough to complete before lunch, you create frequent dopamine events. Clarity also prevents decision fatigue. The prefrontal cortex functions best when you give it concrete commands, not vague ambitions like be productive. So write something explicit, finish draft 1, or review chapter summaries. Each micro-completion refuels anticipation for the next segment. Third, create an anticipation trigger before every task. Just before you begin, spend 10 seconds visualizing how good finishing will feel. Not abstract achievement, real sensory satisfaction. Imagine checking the box, pressing send, closing your notebook. That short preview of reward primes the striatum and spikes dopamine early, converting dread into eagerness. Athletes do versions of this constantly. Picture the win, feel the body lighten, then start running. You're replicating that effect cognitively. What matters is to make anticipation felt, not just thought. Fourth, celebrate completion instantly. Every time you finish a step, reward your brain within 30 seconds. The reward doesn't need to be huge, a check mark, a sip of a drink, a deep stretch, a tiny victory dance. The immediacy is apada. When reward timing is consistent, dopamine tagging becomes reliable. The brain encodes effort leads to pleasure precisely at those intervals. If you delay or skip the acknowledgement, dopamine decay makes the lesson weaker. Think of Pavlov's dog without the bell. Timing is everything. Next, reflect to lock in the dopamine memory circuit. At the end of each session, or your day if you prefer longer cycles, take 1 minute to note what went to's, right? Or just think, that worked or that felt smoother than last time. Reflection activates serotonin, which stabilizes dopamine's excitement into calm confidence. It tells your system that the loop is safe to repeat. When you end with reflection, your subconscious categorizes the entire day as rewarding, not stressful. That prevents burnout while keeping motivation warm overnight. Now, let's layer these steps into an example daily. Morning wake cue lights your system. You smell coffee, stretch, maybe put on the same focus soundtrack. Dopamine rises gently with that sensory pattern. Next, you define your one goal and divide it into 3 bites, each small enough to finish without dread. After every chunk, you pause for a micro reward, brief breath, satisfaction note, quick body movement. Midday, you reset the loop with another sensory cue, perhaps opening a window or ordzek. In the afternoon, you revisit your progress sheet, a visible tracker reminding your brain of success patterns. Finally, at night, you jot one reflection line connected to gratitude. That seals the daily map with serotonin. Wake up tomorrow, repeat the same cues, and the loop deepens further. Within weeks, your dopamine system recognizes this as the default operating rhythm. Why does this structure work so well? Because it harnesses predictability and novelty together. Predictable cues build stability. Small daily variations, like tweaking one micro goal or adjusting the workspace lighting, keep dopamine receptors responsive. It's the neurological sweet spot between safety and surprise. You're feeding anticipation, fulfillment, and calm in one continuous arc. Let's connect this to what you've learned before. The morning cue ritual acts as your anchor. It primes the brain through contextual association. The small goals represent chunking. They provide short feedback intervals that keep dopamine flowing. The anticipation trigger capitalizes on the reward prediction mechanism. The celebration step satisfies immediate feedback needs, and the reflection process balances the dopamine-serotonin relationship for sustainable drive. Every element you've practiced so far lives here together, cycling daily. Here's a brief, real-life example using creative work. Imagine you're an artist finishing digital illustrations. Each morning, you light a mild citrus candle, your cue. You set a micro-target, complete one rough sketch before lunch. Before starting, you visualize posting it or sharing with a friend. That's your anticipation spike. When finished, you mark it digitally with a check and take a 10-second stretch, acknowledging the success. At night, you note one improvement in your sketch or workflow. After a month, drawing no longer feels like a challenge. It feels incomplete without that pattern. That's dopamine automation pattern. Now, be aware of one common pitfall: trying to overengineer reward. Some people use excessive treats or constant devices as incentives, which desensitize dopamine receptors. The goal isn't to overwhelm the brain with external pleasure, but to teach it that progress itself equals pleasure. Keep rewards symbolic, not consumptive. For instance, visual completion marks, moments of pride, or gentle rituals are more sustainable than sugar spikes or endless entertainment breaks. You're aiming for balance, just enough reward to encode the behavior, not enough to overshadow it. Another advanced technique for maintaining rhythm is anticipatory journaling. Each evening, write one line predicting tomorrow's most rewarding moment. It could be finishing that workout or sending that email. This subtle preview activates low-level dopamine overnight, causing your brain to wake already primed for follow-through. Morning cues then amplify that readiness. The result is effortless motion through early tasks because expectation was quietly building while you rested. For anyone struggling with energy dips, integrate micro-reset periods. After each 90-minute cycle, do a brief movement or breathing reset, 15 slow breaths or a 2-minute walk. Neuroscientists confirm that periodic resets prevent dopamine depletion and restore receptor sensitivity. Think of it as stretching your motivation muscles before they cramp. You return fresh rather than waiting to crash. Let's tie everything together with a metaphor. Picture your day as a series of gentle waves rather than a single uptake. Picture your day as a series of gentle waves rather than a single uptake. Each wave begins with anticipation, peaks with micro-achievement, and rests in reflection. Dopamine gives the push, serotonin gives the glide. Stack enough waves, and your momentum becomes continuous forward flow. That's the daily rhythm mastered performers live by: steady pace, no lost motion. Here's the full sequence summarized: cue, define, anticipate, act, reward, reflect. That's the neurological language of motivation. Practice that cycle deliberately until it runs itself. Within a few weeks, you'll notice spontaneous motivation, the point where starting feels natural, not forced. It's not about becoming hyper-efficient, it's about aligning your biochemistry so progress feels satisfying all day long. Once you've stabilized this framework, expansion becomes effortless. Add new goals into the same rhythm, your brain will treat them as familiar circuits. Over time, that internal structure frees you from external pressure because you're powered by a self-regulating system. Dopamine no longer controls you, you guide it. And that's where we head next: redefining motivation itself. After understanding the chemistry and establishing the daily structure, we'll zoom out to the identity level, how this changes how you see yourself. Because at that stage, motivation stops being a tool you use and becomes a reflection of who you are. The new definition of motivation. Let's zoom out. Up to this point, you've learned all the inner mechanics, the anchors, loops, and daily rhythm, but now it's time to redefine what motivation actually is. Most people still treat motivation like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, completely out of their control. But neuroscience says otherwise. Motivation isn't a mystery mood, it's a system you design. Once you understand that, discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like engineering. Here's the mental shift. Dopamine isn't about having energy, it's about direction. It rewards movement toward what you've taught your brain to value. So the question isn't, how do I feel motivated? The question is, what have I trained my brain to find rewarding? When progress itself becomes the reward, motivation turns from an emotional state into a predictable pattern. You no longer chase inspiration, you create conditions that trigger it. Think about how we usually talk about motivation. We wait for the feeling to arrive. We assume productive people are just naturally driven. But if you looked inside their brains, you'd find a network that anticipates satisfaction from effort, not outcome. They've rewired their dopamine to light up during pursuit, exactly the opposite of someone who only feels reward after results. That's why they move even on low-energy days. They're not different species, they've simply trained their chemistry to expect pleasure in progress. This reframing also exposes why motivation hacks fade fast. A cold shower, a quote, an energy drink. They jolt the system but never rearrange its priorities. Real motivation is a circuit, not a spark. It depends on repeating the same loop until dopamine associates effort with satisfaction and the prefrontal cortex trusts that association. That's the whole journey you've been building. Awareness of the trap, clear goals, chunked wins, personalized cues, repetition, and balance. Together, they transform motivation from inspiration into infrastructure. There's another subtle implication here. Motivation is not moral. You're not good when you have it and bad when you don't. It's just chemistry following instructions. The beauty of this neutrality is that you can reassign it any time. If your brain can learn to crave short-term distractions, it can learn to crave long-term growth through the same process. Consistent pairing of EFA. Consistent pairing of EFA fopal isquitherbalix. That's liberation, not guilt. Let's ground this in practice. When you catch yourself thinking, I need more motivation, translate it to I need more visible reward cues. Then check your loop. Do you have clear triggers before tasks? Small completions during them? Concluding reflections afterward? If any link is missing, dopamine loses its roadmap. Replace I'm unmotivated with I haven't refreshed my anticipation. It turns self-criticism into curiosity, which immediately reopens the learning pathway in your brain. Here's a quick story. One of my clients used to complain, I can't stay consistent, something's wrong with me. We reframed it using this model. She built micro rewards into every scriptwriting session, a warm drink, a short playlist, a visible tracker. Within a month, the phrase changed to, I can't stop doing this now. I can't stop doing this now. Same person, same job, different chemistry. That's the embodied version of redefined motivation. Think of it this way, motivation used to be a feeling you waited for. Now it's a system that waits for you. Each cue you designed is like a lever. Pull one, dopamine activates. Stack them daily and your behavior runs on autopilot toward growth. You've moved from being a passenger in your biology to being the driver. That's the real upgrade, agency power. That's the real upgrade, agency power. So when people say, I wish I felt more motivated, you'll know the secret answer. You don't need the feeling, you need the formula. Dopamine is about pursuit, not possession. The satisfaction lives in the chase itself. When you engineer those cues, anticipation, action, reflection, you're literally sculpting the rhythm of motivation inside your brain. It's mechanical creativity, design the pattern, let chemistry follow. And here's the identity, design the pattern, let chemistry follow. And here's the identity, Dapatus. You're no longer someone who tries to be productive. You're someone who understands how motivation works from the inside out. You build systems that automatically generate forward motion. You've stopped trusting dopamine to show up randomly because now you guide it consciously. You've become the architect of your own drive, converting biology into blueprint. Remember this sentence as your psychic anchor. Motivation isn't what happens to you, it's what you train to happen within you. Once that sinks in, every big goal becomes less about waiting for courage and more about running your loop again. Motivation stops being fragile. It becomes reliable, renewable, and personal, crafted to your life, not borrowed from a quote. That's the new definition, and it's how you'll keep getting stuff done long after willpower. Your brain, rewired for progress. Here's the truth your brain has been trying to tell you. Dopamine doesn't care what you chase, only that you chase. Every craving, every burst of motivation, every distraction you've ever followed was just your reward system doing its default job. But now you understand that you can guide it. You can train it to light up for progress instead of procrastination, for creation instead of consumption. That's not theories. That's not theory. Think about what you've built across this journey. You learned how small, fast dopamine hits once hijacked your focus, how every scroll or ping tricked your brain into thinking you were achieving something. Then you flipped the script. You turned dopamine into fuel for real momentum using chunked goals, emotional anchors, and neuroplastic repetition. You took a system built for survival and taught it modern self-control. That's evolution at the personal level. The old version of you fought motivation like it was a battle of willpower, every day another tug of war between should and want. But the rewired version doesn't fight, she designs. Each cue, each reflection, each micro-reward is a message to your own nervous system. This is what matters. Over time, those messages become habit, those habits become identity, and that identity turns progress into your default state. You might notice subtle shifts already. Tasks that used to drain you now feel smoother to start. The resistance fades faster because your brain knows where the payoff lies. That small clue means your dopamine map has changed. You're no longer addicted to novelty, you're addicted to advancement. And that is what every high performer secretly runs on, the pleasure of measurable progress. Here's the simple recap worth engraving into memory. Consistent cues teach anticipation. Small wins sustain motivation. Emotional anchors make effort feel rewarding. Reflection stabilizes chemistry for longevity. Nothing about that requires discipline superpowers, just design and follow through. If you've applied even one of these pieces already, you've proven something profound. Motivation isn't something you wait for, it's something you wire. The most empowering part is how fast the feedback starts. Within a week of deliberate cue-reward pairing, neurons adjust. Within a month of repeated small wins, attention sharpens. Within a few months, effort feels natural. When people see you thriving and say, "You're so disciplined," you'll quietly know it's just neuroscience done consistently, habit loops aligned with biology. So when tomorrow's distractions call, when the phone buzzes, when the comfort of delay shows up, remember, that's just your old wiring asking for attention. Smile, acknowledge the signal, and then feed your new loop instead. Do one small step, celebrate it immediately, and your brain will choose that. You're not resisting temptation, you're updating code. Before we close, let me give you one last mantra to anchor this transformation. Dopamine doesn't decide your direction, you do. It simply mirrors your training. Feed it effort, and it will crave growth. Feed it noise, and it will crave escape. The difference is repetition. So test the new wiring today. Pick one task that's been waiting, write the first sentence, take the first walk, open the project file, and pair it with a cue that feels genuinely good. When you finish, mark the completion instantly. Notice the satisfaction. That spark isn't luck, it's your biology responding to better leadership. Here's your headline takeaway. You can teach your brain to love progress. Every cue, reward, and reflection is a line of code rewriting the story. Redefining. You've officially moved from fighting distraction to programming motivation. If you want to keep exploring brain-based productivity, learning deeper dopamine strategies, and mindset upgrades, subscribe and check the next video linked here. That's where we'll take this system to the advanced level, designing environments that keep you in flow automatically. Your brain's ready. The wiring's in motion. Now it's time to enjoy the ride forward. But don't just nod and move on. Test it right now. Choose one small task you've been putting off, pair it with a cue that feels good, and reward yourself the second you finish. You'll feel that surge of ease and focus within minutes. That's not motivation luck, that's your dopamine system responding to leadership. Start today. Teach your brain that progress is the reward, and watch how quickly action becomes the default setting.